When I was in college, I got a great job delivering furniture for this well-established mom and pop operation. This was the late 90s, so there was no background check, no drug test, etc. My dorm mate Daniel had gotten a job there with me the same day, so it was pretty cool. I am not a super private person, but I think everybody has some inherent amount of nosiness about them. Delivering furniture to people includes the bizarre social contract wherein complete strangers ask other complete strangers to come in their home. I remember after my very first day of work being astounded by just how much craziness I had witnessed, and the creepiest part is that it wasn't some big guy or some sideshow freak. It was a little old lady. So my first delivery was a very expensive, very heavy bedroom set. A chest of drawers, a dresser with a big mirror and top set, and 2 nightstands. We got everything loaded on the truck and made sure we had the address and the owner's name, Miss Nettie Carroll, and we headed out. My college was in an area that consisted of 3 to 4 mid-sized cities, surrounded by many smaller rural towns. This delivery was going to a town I'd heard about but never visited. This was before any of us had access to Google Maps, so we grabbed the map out of the glove box and hit the road. We left the city and started getting into the more rural areas. Lots of trailers, lots of dilapidated older homes, and extreme poverty on the outskirts. We finally reached the address for the county road where the house was located and saw that it was apparently at the end of a very long driveway. It was around noon in the middle of the Alabama summer, so it was oppressively hot outside. When we reached the bend at the end of the driveway, we saw that inexplicably there was a gorgeous Victorian-style home. A coworker said, "Wow, this doesn't belong here." I approached the house and knocked on the door. Waited, but nothing. I knocked again and gave it a 30 count before realizing that there was an old school metal door knocker, the kind with the metal plate and metal ring that you lift and then bang against the frame. Eventually I heard the door's lock disengage and there stood a little old lady, probably about 5 feet tall, with a perfect little puffball of white hair on her head, wearing a blue and yellow floral print dress. I didn't say anything at first because I was literally unable to comprehend what I was seeing on her face. She had on gobs and gobs of pasty peach colored makeup, bright red lipstick, and blue eyeshadow. It was literally caked on. It looked as though she used upward strokes on her eyeshadow because it gave her face an expression of perpetual surprise. I would later in the day describe it to my drinking buddies in my dorm as looking like she put that shit on with a shotgun. And man, the perfume. She had on so much that standing away from her doorway about 3 or 4 feet, I could frickin' taste it. In smaller doses, it might have smelled like green apples, but the volume that she'd chosen to wear gave it a poisonous smell, not unlike insecticides. Eventually, I was able to say something along the lines of, "I'm here to deliver your bedroom set." I found I was able to carry on if I pretended to have something very important to look at on my delivery sheet, instead of looking at the lady. I'm a big dude, 6'1" and around 235. I played football in school, grew up rough, and so on, but this little old woman terrified the living heck out of me, and shit was about to get much weirder. She welcomed us. Daniel, I found out, had come up to the house and was looking up at the little old lady with a look of absolute astonishment. And she opened the door to an immaculately decorated anteroom with a thick red and gold oriental rug. There were exposed beams on the ceiling, beautiful old school brass fixtures, the whole 9 yards. She said, "Y'all can come right through here and then wind around the sitting room there and just bring it back all the way to the main bedroom." The whole time she was very flirty. Daniel and I went into the back of the delivery truck and exchanged "What the hex?" and "Did you seize?" before trying to get our stuff together long enough to load the dresser on the dolly. We got back to the front porch and found that the door was standing open, so we eased the dresser through the front door and waited in the sitting room with the dresser on the dolly. As we stood there, it dawned on me that I anticipated coming into the house and cooling off, but it was just as hot inside the house as it was outside, around 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Daniel was whispering around the edge of the dresser. "Man, this is screwed up. This poor old woman is freaking crazy." When I whispered back, "Do you hear that?" He stopped, half cocked his head to the side, then said, "No, what is it?" I said, "Really? Listen. Singing. Da 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 na na. Sounds like an xylophone. You don't hear that?" "Fed up with me," Daniel said. "Dude, what the heck are you even trying to say?" "Wait, I do hear it, never mind." About this time, Miss Carroll came back in the front of the house and said, "Alright, well, I've gotten everything moved about for you strapping gentlemen," which she followed up with this creepy, but girlish giggle. We followed her through the sitting room with the dresser on the dolly, carefully dodging every manner of expensive-looking heirloom furniture and knickknack. As he backed down the hall, Daniel leaned around the dresser again and whispered, getting louder. I realized he was right, and it was definitely a xylophone. We stopped outside a massive bedroom with similarly expensive-looking decor and set the dresser up on end. I was looking at the doorframe, considering how best to get the dresser into the room, when it dawned on me why I recognized the music coming down the hallway here. In the house of this little creepy old lady who lived in $1 million home, out in the woods with no air conditioning, I was hearing the unmistakable hook from the song of Girls by the Beastie Boys. What the actual heck is going on? For some reason, this actually broke the hair on the back of your neck feeling I'd had since arriving, and I had to chuckle. But that was to be a short-lived break. Miss Carol squeezed past us and back up the hall with a, "Oh," tight squeeze. And Daniel and I had ourselves a good laugh about it while we were getting the dresser moved into the room and against the wall. When we finished moving it, we fastened the mirror onto the top and went back to the truck. To Miss Carol, I said, "So, is the rest of this going in the same bedroom?" To which she replied, "No. The 2 nightstands and the chest of drawers will be going down the hall." I resisted the urge to say, "You mean the Beastie Boys room?" And Daniel and I went to the truck. We loaded the chest of drawers on the big dolly and the 2 nightstands on the smaller one, then went back inside. Once we got to the end of the hall, I noticed that the other bedroom door was open and Miss Carol was standing in the hallway. She cooed, "Right this way, boys. All of that is going in here." I was pushing the smaller dolly with the 2 nightstands, so I rounded the corner first and realized 2 things almost immediately. 1, I named that tune scales are right on, and 2, hey, so there's a mostly naked girl lying across the bed. No, really, I'm not joking. The girl looked to be in her mid to late 20s, and she was lying perpendicular across the bed in a bikini, sound asleep. True to form, Girls by the Beastie Boys was blaring from her CD player. I realized we'd been hearing it for over an hour, and that it had to have been playing on repeat. Miss Carol finally seemed to notice the girl and said, "Misty, cover yourself." Then she looked at me with that fantastically horrifying makeup on her face and winked. At some point, I realized that I was rushing as fast as I could to get out of there, and Daniel seemed to be doing the same. We got the chest of drawers put together in record time, all the while sweating like crazy because there is no air conditioning at all. As we were finishing up, Misty apparently had enough. She sat up, eyes closed, and yelled, "I'm trying to freaking sleep. I told you I didn't even want this stuff in here, Nettie." Not Grandma, not Granny, not Mama, but Nettie. Misty, still with her eyes closed, rolled over and went soundly to sleep. This sent Nettie into a rage. She started yelling in this shrill, high-pitched scream. "You can get out of my house, you filthy cocksucker." And on and on and on. Horrible, horrible name-calling accusations, etc. Just a complete 180 from the sweet little old southern lady with the scary makeup into this foul-mouthed shrieking monster. At some point, I had backed up all the way against the far wall of the room and I found myself out of real estate. Just when I thought things were about to go psycho overdrive, Daniel calmly and politely chimes in. "And where would you like this nightstand?" Without taking a breath, Miss Carol replied, "Right over there on the far side of the bed if you don't mind. Thanks." We quickly had her sign the paperwork and hightailed it out of there. As I was backing out of the front drive, Daniel said, "Hit it, dude. I swear Leatherface is going to come busting out of that front door any minute now." I still don't know if I narrowly avoided something really bad or if this guy was just deeply unstable, but it has stayed with me for years. A stranger walked past me while I was at work one day, stopped and asked me out on a date. I'd never seen him before, so it caught me off guard, but he came across as confident and kind of old school, so I said yes. He asked if he could pick me up for a coffee date, and I agreed. When he picked me up, he already had a McDonald's coffee for me. It was from right near my house. I took a sip and immediately realized I didn't like it because there was no sugar in it. I have a huge sweet tooth and always have sugar in coffee. That tiny moment is what changed the entire night for me. Because I didn't like the coffee, I stopped properly drinking it and just pretended to sip it so I wouldn't seem rude. But from that point on, my brain was also starting to question everything. Why would he have already buy me a random coffee when the whole point of the date was supposedly to go get coffee together? He didn't even know how I took it. Then things started feeling wrong. He drove straight past where we were meant to go. When I asked, he casually changed the destination to somewhere further away. During the drive, I also caught him in a small lie. He said he worked at my local Woolworths, but I told him that that couldn't be true because I'm there all the time and would have recognized him. He didn't really respond. He then started repeatedly asking if I had finished my drink. Not once or twice, but around 10 times. By the time we turned off the main road toward the new location, it was fully dark. At one point, he turned down a road heading toward bushland. I stopped questioning him at that point because something in me felt like I needed to stay calm, not escalate anything. There was also something large and metal in the glove box that kept moving and banging, and he kept drawing attention to it. After that, his behavior changed completely. He started driving erratically, swerving from one side of the road to the other while using his elbows on the wheel. He started yelling that he was Kanye West and I was his Kim Kardashian. Then he drove down a dirt road and then off the dirt road into the bush. We were driving through trees in the dark. Eventually, he stopped the car right at the edge of the lake. Then he just sat there in silence for about 15 minutes. It felt like he was waiting for something. When he eventually got out of the car, it was pitch black outside. I couldn't see where he went or what he was doing. My heart was absolutely pounding. The second he got out, I grabbed my phone and texted my friend telling her to call me and say we had training and not to ask questions. I also made sure to casually describe where I was in a way that made sense. When he came back and got in the car, my phone rang. My friend followed exactly what I asked. After the call, he just looked at me and said, "So you have to go?" I said yes. He then sat in silence for another few minutes before finally turning the car back on and driving me home without saying a single word. Never saw him again. To this day, I still wonder if not liking that coffee is what saved me. If he had added sugar and I'd actually finished the drink, would my life have changed completely? My girlfriend and I took some time out to do some backpacking and travel the world. We went to some incredible places and met interesting people, but our most interesting story is probably this one. We all went over to Bolivia, Mexico, and many places that have some unsafe reputations. However, we are both pretty good at reading people and staying out of trouble, so we never had any major incidents. We were only a fairly tight budget at this point in our journey, as we had recently been to Japan and wanted to chill for a bit before finding some work in Vietnam. We decided to volunteer at a Cambodian island. It's a bit of a luxury island full of resorts that we couldn't normally afford to stay at, so it seemed like a good gig. I worked behind the bar at this resort and my girlfriend worked in the restaurant. In return, we got to sleep in the dorm and eat our own meals for free. The manager told me that since I was working behind the bar, a Scottish and English guy who lived on the island would likely come and see me and that his name was Dog. It didn't take long for this to take place. A fairly old guy in his late 50s or early 60s came into the bar. He was quite tall and still powerfully built and was accompanied by a massive Rottweiler, which he told me was also called Dog. We had a bit of a laugh taking the piss out of each other, and he was making fun of me being Scottish and I was making fun of him going by the name Dog and being standard English-British bullshit. I noticed he was always wearing wife beaters that said Dog's Offshore Bar and had a picture of his dog, the Rottweiler, on them. I got to know more about Dog the man. He used to work in construction and offshore, as did I, so we had quite a bit to talk about, and heaps of opportunity to talk, as he usually arrived for his first beer at 7 a.m. He was clearly an alcoholic, but he never struck me as a bad person early on. Just a sadly complicated one, like when you talk to somebody who is homeless maybe. Anybody who's ever been to Vietnam or Thailand or Cambodia or any Southeast Asian country will understand how rare it is to see a dog that's not some kind of street mutt or a tiny pet. A huge dog like that would stand out even in Europe, however. Even for a Rottweiler, it was huge, massively muscular with a metal chain to give some semblance of control if it were to kick off. I really like dogs, so I was quite interested in what this huge dog was doing on the island, and always made sure to have some water out for it. It was friendly enough, but never left its owner's side and seemed to be a working dog. In terms of its intensity, it was clearly a guard dog. It turned out the dog was actually a Finnish drug dealer's dog, and Dog, the person, had bought him. He told me the dog had an attack command and he kept him primed by using it often on other island dogs. He told me he had killed multiple dogs this way. I didn't believe this at first, but there was an island dog the manager would often leave food out for, and this dog would come near the bar, usually when Dog's monster dog wasn't about, but that night he must have been hungry enough to brave it, and Dog hissed the command. and the Rottweiler bounded for the island dog, knocking over chairs and all sorts until he was called off. It's actually pretty crazy. One night, I was sitting at the bar talking with Dog about this job I would be taking on soon at a digital marketing company. I was in talks with the CEO at this company at the time. It was for a digital marketing job in which I would work from home or coffee shops updating and improving websites. He said it sounded made up and that the company was likely some kind of con to get my bank details. I told him it was indeed a real company and that I had Googled it. He was really drunk at this point and the restaurant was now closed, so my girlfriend joined us and we were all having a beer at the bar. He told my girlfriend how I believed everything I read online and how I shouldn't do that. He said people publish all kinds of made up stuff on there. And I asked what he was referring to, and he said, "Never Googled me." So I was like, how could I Google you? Your name is Dog. If I Googled you, I would just see a picture of a Alsatian. But then I remembered those tops he wore at Dog's offshore bar, so I told him, "I'm going to Google you," laughing. He was getting quite annoyed, but at this point, other than owning a weaponized canine, I thought he was pretty harmless. But I was wrong. I began reading out loud the interesting things I found out about this bar and related stories. One of the particular interests was about a conviction. The joking and laughing stopped, and I quickly stopped reading out loud. I quickly looked at my girlfriend, and I could see the smile leave her face as she realized we were drinking with a killer. It turned out this guy had murdered his Thai wife and then briefly imprisoned before paying bail. You can pay bail for murder in Thailand and then fleeing the country before trial. He had stabbed her, and his alibi to the police was that he couldn't have killed her because he was messing with a ladyboy on the beach at the time. He told us that he had been framed and that his wife's ex was in the police, and he had killed her for moving on, etc. I was nodding along to everything he said and trying my best to show that I agreed with him, while making sure the machete I used to open up coconuts for cocktails was in easy reach, should his beast be given any command words. He told us about how hard it was being one of the few white guys in Thai prison, how he had to attack guards to get into solitary confinement, and how they then beat him mercilessly. He told us they used to leave Shanks in his room and put him in the yard with pedophiles for him to kill. He told us that he had killed before he went to prison and that he killed while he was inside, but he didn't kill his wife. His wife was a Thai prostitute he met while trafficking women from Thailand to Singapore on his boat, the same one he used to flee Thailand after his arrest and set up his bar, Dog's Offshore Bar, with the tagline, "Dogs welcome, wives must be kept on leashes or under control." We both acted like we believed him and eventually he left. The whole night, however, I was waiting next to the door for him and his dog to come for us. I even propped a bin up against the door so anybody coming in would knock it over, so we would maybe have a chance to react. I nearly attacked my friend when he came in. We quickly decided to leave after this and only saw Dog again once more. My girlfriend was opening a can of coconut milk for a curry, and he came by and jokingly asked if she needed a knife, and he patted his back pocket. If you want to Google this, if you Google Dog's Offshore Bar, you'll see what I did. He was living in a town on the island with his dog keeping watch while he slept. I'm not sure if he's still there now, but Dog, let's not meet again. When I was 19, I was married with 2 kids. My oldest son Jacob was 2 and the younger boy Tyler was about 1. We all lived in an apartment in a tiny little town. There were 4 apartments in our building. My mom lived in the front left-hand apartment and we lived in the back upstairs one. We lived there peacefully until this night. In this tiny town there's a woman, Leslie, who suffers from many mental illnesses, including schizophrenia. She doesn't like people and prefers to be left alone. She often wanders the streets at all hours and seems to particularly hate my younger son. If we passed her on the street, she would stare at him and burst into a curse word-fueled rant. We would just ignore her and continue on our way. So now that you know some backstory, let's get into what happened on this particular night. The boys had been in bed for a couple hours and my husband and I had just gone to bed. I feel like I had just closed my eyes when I heard a noise from the front of the apartment. It kind of sounded like the toy box had been dumped, so I assumed one of the boys had gotten up. I hopped out of bed to see what they were up to. I knew if one was up to something, the other would be up soon, and that would result in a very long night. When I walked out of my room, though, I was shocked to realize that the front door was standing open. Silhouetted by the porch light and hunched at my boy's bedroom door was Leslie. She was muttering to herself about killing the little demon child. In one hand, she held the screwdriver as she used both hands to jiggle the knob. Luckily, the boys' door stuck when it was humid out, so there was a trick to opening it. I knew and understood that Leslie was just sick and not in her right mind, but I wasn't sure how to handle this whole situation. Clearly, I didn't want to turn her aggravated attention to me, but I needed to get her away from my boy's door. She just kept jiggling the handle and muttering about the demon child. I should mention at this point that Tyler was and is the most joyful kid I had ever known. Jacob has always been quiet and thoughtful, while Tyler is loud and smiles brighter than the sun. He will do things to make someone else happy. Jacob also thrives on making people happy, but he does it in such small ways that you almost don't realize until you do. I was sure there was literally no possible reason for her hatred of Tyler. I was sure it was just her mental illnesses speaking, but it was insane. Anyways, back to the story. Luckily, my mom was walking home from the bar. Across the street from the apartment, she heard the crash, which I now know was my front door being smashed open. My mom had lived in this town longer than I had and had dealt with Leslie's outbursts several times. So while I was trying to decide how to distract her from my boy's room without getting stabbed, my mom was creeping up the stairs to my apartment. My mom stepped into the apartment and Leslie turned back to look at her. My mom asked her what she was doing and she started crying and told my mom that she had to kill him. They kept telling her that she had to. By this point, my husband had woken up and called for help. The cops came and escorted her away. They took her to her sister's house down the road. Fortunately, her sister is under no illusions about her sister's condition. She knew that Leslie only got bad when she stopped taking meds and began drinking instead, so Leslie was taken to the hospital to get her stabilized and back on her meds. The family apologized and we moved before she was released from the hospital. The boys slept in my room until we did move and for a while after that. Last I knew, Leslie was doing okay. They think Tyler set her off because he resembled the baby the family lost. When she saw him, she decided her meds weren't working because she was seeing things again. So she stopped taking them and then began drinking because she couldn't deal with seeing this baby everywhere. Maybe that's crap, maybe it's true. I'm not sure. We haven't seen her since, and her family works hard to keep people from spreading stories. Tyler is 18 now and is still full of sunshine. Jacob is 19. We have 2 more kids and have been married for 20 years. It is still the scariest night of my life. I'm forever grateful for my mom and that darn sticky door. I'm sure either Leslie or I would be dead if she had managed to get that door open. This particular experience was not as obviously life-threatening, but was a doozy of a night, y'all. I'll let you be the judge. And sorry for the formatting, I'm on mobile. Background. This happened about 7 years ago. I'm female, 5'2" and petite, so try to be extra careful because I've had some pretty close calls. This night, I clearly had a lapse in judgment. Also, I don't do hard drugs, but during my college years, I drank a fair amount and smoked copious amounts of marijuana. Presenting the worst date ever. I waited tables for 7 years, working my way through college. I served all kinds of people, of course, during that time, and grew very comfortable working with the general public, playing up small talk or putting on a friendly demeanor, and more importantly, waiting the heck out of some tables. I was good at my job, so I enjoyed my work most of the time, aside from the occasional douchebag customer. My restaurant was right off the highway next to several large hotels, most of which ran between $90 and $150 a night. Not the worst, not the best. I'd often get tables whose guests were staying at these hotels, and they would walk over for a meal more than one night in a row if they were staying longer than one day. This is how I met Bob. Bob came in on a busy night, sat quietly by himself, and required minimal effort. He ordered my only cobbler and coffee, which he ate quickly. I sent him on his way, to go coffee in hand with very minimal small talk. I noticed he smiled at me, eyes lingering a bit longer than normal, and immediately knew he was interested in me. Most women know the look. Despite this, he left without saying anything else, and I thought that was the end of it. He also left me a fat tip. Since he had a small order, it was almost 90% gratuity. The next night at work, he's back. He's requested my section this time. Again, he orders modestly, no actual meal, leaves a great tip, but barely says more to me than the few words it takes to place this order. Cool. Minimal effort, maximum reward. I dig it. We repeat this 3 nights in a row until finally at the end of night 3, he opens up and tells me a bit about himself. He is staying at the hotel next door for his job working on cell phone towers and telephone poles. He'll be in the area for several months, he says. Shows me pictures on his phone of him in gear at the top of very high towers, and his story seems to check out. He wraps all of this info up by asking for my number. I did find him relatively attractive. Not crazy good looking, but he had a nice enough smile. He was barrel-chested, a big dude with curly hair that was shaggy but kinda nice. The kinds girls women pay big money for, I thought. I was a bit lonely at the time, and he seemed normal, so I agreed to give him my number. Over the next few days we made small talk, but nothing substantial. Looking back, aside from his employment, I learned almost nothing about Bob during this conversation period. Nothing that sticks with me, that is. It was all meaningless small talk via text. Finally, I agreed to grab a drink with him on the 4th of July weekend, and having no prior plans for the holiday, I was excited to have something to do. Usually, I would have insisted I meet him somewhere public to protect myself, but I had been interacting with him for over a week, so my guard was dropping. He suggested that we smoke prior to hitting the bar. I liked this idea, not wanting to go to his hotel room for obvious reasons. I reluctantly agreed my place would probably be best since it's closer to downtown. I give him my apartment info, a 1-bedroom apartment where I live alone. That might have been stupid of me. The night arrives and he's punctual. Both of us have some weed and we are very well supplied. It's important to mention that I am also a very experienced smoker and had lots of different methods for us to choose from. Pipes, steamrollers, papers, blunt wraps, all of it. I ask his preferred method and he says bong. Of course, the one thing I don't have. Mine had recently broken. I tell him so and suggest a blunt or a bowl, but he insists he wants a bong rip. I tell him I don't know where to get a bong this late. He insists that he knows where and that he must have a bong rip. So I allow him to ferry me to a shadier gas station in the area where he purchases not only a large glass bong, but also a grinder and lighter, even though I have us well supplied at home. We return. He gets his bong hit. I find that whole thing odd but brush it off and enjoy my buzz. Bob has me roll a joint after several bong hits. I finish and go to light it and he stops me. Let's smoke that on the way to the bar, he says. I live less than a 10-minute drive from the bars and tell him so. I also tell him that it's a holiday weekend so cops will be out in full force and that I think we should just play it safe. He steamrolls my objections and insists everything will be fine and I'm worrying for nothing. Tell him I'm not comfortable with it and he just repeats himself. Red flag. Apparently I have no choice in the matter, so we leave and head to the bars. Joints are burning. We arrive safely. Bob parks in a very obvious pay-to-park lot. These lots are heavily patrolled by tow companies, but are usually only staffed by an automatic kiosk machine where you can pay. However, since it was a holiday weekend, there was an actual person attendant as well. Bob parks and we begin to walk toward the bar, making no move toward the machine to pay. I warn him that this lot is heavily towed, but he once again steamrolls over my warning and tells me, it'll be fine. FYI, I knew this would not be fine. He would 100% get towed if he didn't pay before we went inside. The parking attendant comes jogging over to us, trying to get our attention as I try unsuccessfully to convince him paying is not optional, but he never stops walking. Finally, the attendant neared us enough to say in our direction, "Hey man, you've got to pay to park or you will get towed." Without an ounce of humor in his voice, cold, chilling, and completely unlike anything I'd heard come out of his mouth all night, he replied just loudly enough to be heard by the man, "If I get towed, I'll stab you." What? My legs almost give way in shock. My brain clicks that I may be in danger. The parking attendant mutters something about towing and walks off. I decided right then and there that he is definitely not my ride anymore. All bets are off because he just threatened to stab the parking attendant. I needed to ditch him, somehow and safely. I take a step away, putting distance between us, but keep pace with him as we walk toward a bar. I ask, "What the heck was that about? You know you're definitely getting towed now that you threatened that guy." "I was just joking," he said. But he didn't say it like a joke, and he definitely didn't laugh. "It wasn't serious," he said. I let him know that I didn't like his behavior. Now in an increasingly crowded area, the witnesses made me bolder. I developed a plan in my head, hoping that I could discreetly phone a cab from the ladies' room and run for it, using the crowd as cover. He knew where I lived, no fixing that, but hopefully his car being towed would slow him down a bit. Bob continued to insist it had all been one big hilarious joke as we entered bar number 1, that I'd misunderstood, and that I couldn't take a joke, that I should know better. His voice had been deadly serious and ice cold though. My instincts told me he had been serious about his threat. I continued planning my escape in my head while he testified to his innocence. I needed to bide my time till the right moment, so I waited, uncomfortably and suddenly aware of how he'd been acting erratically all night, and I was just now noticing. I feel my gut twist inside me. I was actually scared now, and I felt like an idiot for brushing off the other warning signs. He clearly wasn't balanced, but if he wanted to kill me, you would think he'd already have done it, right? In the safety of my one-bedroom apartment, right? I hung my hopes on that thought. We enter bar number 1. It's obvious I'm miffed by the encounter in the parking lot. He never did pay, and Bob seems annoyed by this. Bob puts a card down on the bar and starts a tab. We order drinks, and I take mine directly from the bartender and watch it like it's my job. Bob is fiddling with his phone when suddenly he grunts in annoyance. Its battery has died. He proceeds to tell me that he was in the middle of transferring money between his accounts when his phone died and that he was putting money on the card that the bartender was holding for our tab. But since his battery died before he was finished, there is no money on that card right now. I immediately offered to pay for the drinks. He could take back his card. I would pay cash. Already, I just wanted the night to be over. Then he said, "There is an ATM in bar number 2, right across the street. I can get cash there. I don't want you to pay. We can go to bar number 2 really quickly. We don't even have to close out this tab. We'll just come right back and pay it." I've been inside bar number 2 many times. I am way more comfortable there than in bar number 1. I'm even friends with one of the bar backs, so I'm hoping perhaps he can help me escape my nightmare date as gracefully as possible with minimal risk. I send up a silent prayer that he's working tonight and agree wholeheartedly to just dip right out of there. Tab unpaid, debit card left behind. He's coming right back to pay anyways, right? We go to bar number 2. The ladies' room is right next to the ATM and he's using it. I never actually saw if he successfully got cash or not. I excuse myself and slip into the ladies' room. I must be the luckiest girl in the world because my friend Heather came stumbling out of a stall behind me as I was staring hopelessly into the mirror above the sinks, silently cursing my own stupidity and wishing I was anywhere else but in my current predicament. I was saved. Relief washed over me in a wave, and I ran into her arms and hugged her violently, telling her all about my weird day, how he'd been erratic all night and threatened to stab the parking attendant not 30 minutes ago in this creepy voice. And most importantly, how I didn't want him to drive me home anymore. How I just wanted to get away but needed a ride. Heather turned out to be with her husband and his friends, some of whom I knew. We made a plan that she'd walk with me to their table and I would sit with them. They'd keep an eye on me as I explained to Bob that I wasn't feeling a connection and wanted to finish the rest of the night with my friends. They'd keep me safe and drive me home later. We planned the whole speech, but I never had to use it. I walked out the bathroom door and he was gone. I didn't see him again that night, nor did he text me. Heather filled everybody in, and the guys were real sweet about it, putting me in the center seat so I was obscured from view mostly by a passerby. A sick feeling in my gut tells me that he stuck around and watched me join the boys at Heather's table and maybe even sit extra low in my chair. My friends took me all the way to my door that night after the bars, making sure I was safely inside. Abandoned on my coffee table were the glass bong, brand new grinder, and lighter Bob had insisted upon buying. Paid probably $60 for it, then maybe took 3 hits off of. The worst part was when I walked into my bathroom after kicking off my heels, after just getting home. I noticed a small glass thing on the side of my bathtub, which I noticed as I sat on the toilet to poop. I picked it up. It was about the size of a tube of lip balm, but fatter and rounder. When I inspected it closely, I found a thimble full of loose white powder on the inside. It seemed to be contained to one side, while the other half was empty and had a hole on top. I examined it closely. I was pretty sure it was coke, but I've never seen anything like that little glass contraption before. Realizing Bob had used my bathroom and it had to be his, I freaked out, thinking that he would surely come back for his drugs if he left them behind on accident. But he never did though, and I tucked away the glass powder-filled thing out of paranoia deep in my closet, afraid that he would return for it. I'd better have it. After a month I tossed it. The whole thing baffled me. If he was short on money, why would he insist on making a special trip to buy something not really needed? Had he ever returned to pay the tab? Did he leave me stranded because I was obviously turned off by his threat? Did he get embarrassed and just leave? He certainly didn't seem like the type, but clearly I made a misjudgment about him somewhere. Was he just impossibly a coked out dude? Like, what the heck was all that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because it's baffled me for years. Bob went radio silent for a month, then texted me hey 3 times in 1 week. I didn't respond. The next week he showed up at my work, requesting my section again. I was shocked to see him, and he'd spotted me already, so I decided to speak to him at least, but give the table away to another server. He acted as if nothing ever happened. He asked me why I didn't respond to his texts. I told him I'm busy, and he said he would like to hang out again. I said I don't think so. He asked why not. Well, because you left me at bar number 2. That's not exactly what happened, he said. Well, regardless, you were my ride, you knew that. You didn't try texting or calling me, and you got my number. You were gone when I came out of the bathroom, but luckily I found some friends, so it didn't matter. I walked away at that point and let somebody else get him, his cobbler. He didn't try to contradict my statement that he left me stranded at the bar at the very least, nor did he mention the cocaine he left in the bathroom. Bob continued to text me occasionally for the next 3 years, maybe every 3 to 6 months or so. A one-word text came through. Hey, testing the waters. I never answered. I keep his number saved in my phone so I don't accidentally answer a text to this very day, just in case he ever tries again. At the time this took place, I was 17, female, and living with my mom and sister, 19 at the time. My parents were going through a bit of a separation, and we had just moved into a home in a less than desirable neighborhood. We had been living in the house for a few months when we started hearing random taps on the front windows. When we would investigate, we found nothing. It happened at night with not a lot of street lighting, so it would have been hard to see them slip away. We called the cops a few times, but they couldn't do anything more than have random patrols drive past our house, which we opted for. We ignored it, but it began to happen more frequently and on our bedroom windows as well. Still, we found nothing, so we had to let it go. Still freaky. We all thought they were stalking us. On top of the random taps, the light we had outside our kitchen door, to light the driveway at night, which was motion activated, kept switching on at seemingly random times. This will be important later. A month or 2 after the taps started, my mom's sister and I were watching a movie in the living room. At this point, I'd like to mention that my family always keeps our doors locked, and I'm pretty sure that saved us here. As we sat there, we heard somebody try the doorknob of the main door, right off the driveway which leads into the kitchen. We all jumped up to try and catch them, but again, there was no one to be seen. We called the cops again, but again, nothing came of it. Now it gets worse. At this point, we were all freaked out and nobody feels safe at home. Even when we are together, but we were stuck due to financial strains. About a week or 2 after the door incident, it all came to a head. One night, after we had all gone to bed, they came back. My sister's bedroom was located just off the kitchen, and as she lay there that night, she heard the distinctive noise of someone trying to pick the lock. My sister flipped and grabbed a knife she had stashed. Our cousin gave it to her after previous incidents and went to investigate. Almost as soon as she got up, our driveway light switched on, and I assumed they bolted. They had tested the light in the past, but I guess they tripped it accidentally anyway. So we called the cops. This time, however, they were pissed. They had been extremely nice to us in the past and seemed genuinely upset that somebody had tried to break in. So the cops go on patrol and, lo and behold, they stopped 3 suspicious teenagers not far from our house. The cops were able to search them because of probable cause. It was super late and they were the only ones about the neighborhood. What they found will forever give me chills. On each of the boys they found knives, binding material, duct tape, ropes, etc., tarps, and a pry bar. They were immediately arrested and the cops returned to tell us what they found. The cop told us that when interviewed, the boys told them that there were several adult males also included in the plan. I don't know if anything ever came of that since there was no evidence connecting them at the time, and that we all know those bitches lived there alone, or something of the like. When the cops left that night, they told us to get a shotgun and shoot through the door if there were any more problems. We immediately did so. I don't like to think about what they were playing that night and it still gives me anxiety, but that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. I live at home with my mom and younger sister and attend college. There was a neighbor in the building across from mine, an older single woman named Susan. When my sister and I first moved in, we would hang out near her building with a former friend. She's worthy of her own story, to be honest, and so we developed a rapport with Susan. We would bring her tea when she was sick and walk her dog. I was next door neighbors with a different woman called Laura. Laura is a mother of 2 young kids, and she and her boyfriend like to sit on their balcony, overlooking the parking lot, and smoke until late hours of the night. Well, one day, Laura was doing this at around 2 a.m. Laura texts my mom that there's been an incident. My mom tells me and my sister. We tend to stay up pretty late, and we went to her balcony to see what was up. In the parking lot, we see a car that's halfway backed into another parked car, but almost at a side angle. Laura says the person who was in the car ran away as soon as they hit the other car. The car, however, remained, still running too. So we were wondering what the heck that was all about. My mom goes downstairs to the car to check for damage when she sees a figure standing at Susan's building. It was a man we'd never seen before, and he was just standing there. Turns out the owner of the sideways car freaked out because he saw us looking and claims literally, somebody stole it and moved it out of the way so they could have my parking spot. The next morning, my mom texts Susan about the incident, as the sideways car was kind of blocking hers. She says she knows what happened and has us come outside so she can tell us. She is standing with the man from the parking lot the night before. He introduces himself as Eric, and says that he is seeing Susan. When we started talking, it turns out he didn't actually know what happened. He only saw somebody running from the car, but that story's irrelevant now. Anyways, we get to talking, and apparently Susan has told him about our family and that I'm studying to be a therapist. I confirm it, and he just lights up. He goes on and on about all the similar work he's done and thanks me for my service. He starts giving me names of places I can go for shadowing hours and resources for getting a job. Finally, he tells me to use his name when applying for jobs in the future, and he would get me a job at the psych center he apparently helped found, which I looked up and could not corroborate. He was very insistent that I use his name. Next, he talks to my sister. Susan had told him that she likes movies, so he told her that he had a small speaking role in one of those teen book to film adaptations we used to obsess over. So of course, when we go home we look up his name, that he gave me along with the movie title. Nowhere is he pictured in the film or given any sort of credit for it, so we dropped the movie title and just looked up his name. It wasn't a movie that we found. Apparently, he had been infamous in our town for years as somebody known as the child biter. He had earned that name by biting an 8-year-old girl who was playing with his daughter. A few years ago, he bites another girl and apparently stalked her family in a public parking lot after. Another few years pass and he has a third victim. We are freaking out and text Laura, who's kind of our gossip buddy. She has 2 young kids, so she's furious that this guy with actual criminal records was allowed to move in, though he wasn't put on the lease. We were concerned too, because a lot of kids live in ours in Susan's building. The question came up of whether to tell Susan or not. We debated, but decided it was the best thing. My mom sends Susan a long text about how we discovered what we did. 5 minutes later, she calls us, tells us to not believe the news articles and the court records and the fact that he pled guilty because he was politically framed by one of the girl's fathers who was running for some small office or something. My mom covers for me and my sister by saying we looked up his name and the movie in front of Laura. Susan demands to know why Laura is concerned. My mom tells her to talk to Laura herself, so she does. She knocks on Laura's door and asks what her concerns are. Laura barely gets one sentence about how there are kids everywhere and she's just trying to be a good parent before Susan turns around and just leaves. Just like that. There are a few families whose kids I babysit who pretty much let their kids wander the complex all day with no supervision. Unless I'm outside, then it's free babysitting apparently. We tell some of them and they're enraged. For 2 days, there's not a single kid outside. After that, I guess the parents decided actually looking after their kids was too much work and gradually let them play outside again alone. A few days later, an 8-year-old girl we babysat named Maddie, this poor kid, has the worst history with getting the attention of creepy men. I think they pick up on her shitty home life, and her friend ran up to tell us about a nice guy at the pool who gave them M&Ms. A few minutes later, Eric strolls up with his bathing suit. Maddie tells us it was him. We avoid eye contact, but he slows when he passes us. We warn Maddie and her friends in 8-year-old terms to stay away from him. Another time we are visiting a friend who lives in his building. He emerges right as we enter the hallway, puts on a huge grin, and starts making small talk. We awkwardly excuse ourselves and go to the friend's house. We go inside and our friend keeps looking out the window. There's Eric standing by his car, just staring through the window. Part of our babysitting includes picking Maddie up from the bus randomly in the week when asked. The bus stop is right next to the pool, and who do we see in a lounge chair with sunglasses, not doing a thing every single day at the bus time? Eric. Now, we were all kind of pissed with this dude. We contact the property manager, who says she can't do anything because he's not registered as living there. If he stays longer than 2 weeks though, he'll be charged for not being on it. Well, the 2 weeks ended, and then we never saw him again. I'm still stumped as to why the heck he told me to use his name as a reference when a simple search of his name shows all of his history. Again, I lived in a nice area in a small suburban town. No idea what it was about those apartments that attracted the weirdos and criminals. Maybe it's some unspoken agreement for them to all gather there that we didn't know about. Maybe in a few days I'll post the story of our friend that claimed she was a witch and tried to murder her parents. But until then, creepy man who bites children, let's not meet again. I have read many of these Let's Not Meet stories on Reddit, and I have always been lucky that I didn't need to write my own until now. My wife and I welcomed our son Lucas, not his real name of course, 6 months ago. It's been a learning curve, and having this baby's thing is not for the birds, but things are finally starting to go smoothly. He is finally sleeping through the night, and that nasty colic he had is gone. I am very lucky that I get to work from home. Even luckier, my wife owns her own business, a photographer. She is home whenever she's not shooting a wedding or at her studio. Most mornings we take a 6.5 mile walk, and Lucas is strapped into his baby carrier and we take off. We usually make it around halfway before we need to stop to give little man a bottle so he will pass out and let us finish the walk in peace. So like usual, we are about halfway done with our walk and the baby starts cranking up for a massive squall. We usually stop at either a park or this nice fountain area with a coffee shop and a grocery store attached. We both wanted coffee in the worst way, so while I sat with the baby, the wife went into the coffee shop for our caffeine. I am slowly rocking Lucas as I feed him when I hear somebody sit on the bench next to me. I smell her before I see her. A heavy cloying perfume. She's dolled up to the nines and an older woman between her late 30s and 40s. She has that hard look that makes her look older than she probably is. What kind of baby is that? She inquires in a heavy Russian accent. I have a propensity for being a smartass, so I reply, a baby? No, the kind. Boy or girl? She asks as she starts smoothing out the romper we have on the baby. He is a boy and 6 months old. I add, a little bit freaked out, this perfect stranger is touching my kid now. Looks healthy. How much does he weigh? She asks, trying to pull the baby to her to get a good look at him. When I am hoping that my wife will come out any second, but of course she's in line waiting for our cappuccinos. I think 18 pounds. He was 9 pounds at birth. I ramble on hoping that she'll just go away. Lucas is drifting off to sleep when she leans over and just snatches him out of my arms. Ah, let me see, big boy. Big frame like Papa? Will be a big boy? No? See, now I'm mad. I ask her for him back. While I glance in the coffee shop, my wife is at the counter at this point. Hand him over now. I say firmly. Not to mention he is now awake and he is totally in that stranger danger stage. So he was mad. She reluctantly hands him over. I try to begin to calm him down, so at first I do not hear what she asks. How much for the baby? I hear her the second time. He's not for sale, I said. I'm incredulous and thankfully I see my wife get our drinks and grab napkins and creamer. So how much do you want? I pay a high price for a baby. She starts touching him again and I yank him backwards. My wife finally comes out and sees the lady touching our kid. My wife is a total mama bear, so she gives the lady dagger eyes, so she gets up and before she goes, she looks at me and says, "You think about it, huh?" Then she walks away. I tell my wife everything and of course she's freaked out as I am. Luckily it's been a week and a half and we have yet to run into her again. This happened a long time ago, easily over a decade. I'm 18 at the time of writing. I couldn't have been older than 3 or 4. Either I forgot it over time, or it is a repressed memory at this point. I only know this even happened because my mom told me. Anyway, as a kid, I loved to go to stores with my mom and run around and play hide and seek. Right off the bat, you can see where this is going. One of my favorite places was to hide in clothing racks and wait for her to peek in and say, "Boo," before I would giggle and run away to the next one. At some point, I disappeared from that section. My mom went to customer service to get them to call my name. When she got there, she saw another parent asking the same thing. She watched as the employees and even the customers roamed the store, calling out names. She began to hyperventilate and excused herself to stand outside and catch her breath. Then she saw the cart boy holding my hand, walking me back into the store. It turns out he was trying to get the kids to follow him with quarters, promising to let them play the games at the front of the store. When I didn't get my quarters, I pitched a fit, and he decided I was more trouble than I was worth. When the cops tried to ask me what happened, I refused to talk to anyone except my granddad, who was on the force at the time. I told him that the man tried to bring us to a car. There was a lady in the car too, with something funny on her head that I couldn't describe. All they knew is that I said it wasn't a hat or a wig. Every friend I've told this story to was considerably freaked out by this. To my knowledge, the girl was never seen again, but I may not know everything, so I'll have to ask again. It's terrifying to think what would have happened if I wasn't such a freaking brat when it came to video games. I know trust your gut gets repeated online constantly, but about 6 months ago, at Dulles Airport, my body reacted to a stranger with such intense fear that I still think about it regularly. About 6 months ago, my husband, 29 male, and I, 24 male, flew from the West Coast back to the East Coast on a red-eye. We landed at Dulles early in the morning, exhausted and kind of delirious in that weird post-overnight flight way. If you know Dulles Airport, you know the pickup situation can be chaotic. Arrivals get backed up constantly, so instead of waiting downstairs, we took our luggage upstairs to departures because pickups there are usually way faster. It was cold outside, but after hours in airports and on a plane, the fresh air honestly felt nice. We leaned against those concrete barriers outside the terminal while my husband called his mom, who was driving from Potomac to pick us up. Traffic was bad, so we were just standing around waiting. That's when a man came over. At first, there was absolutely nothing strange about him. He looked like a completely normal late 20s or early 30s tech guy. Clean clothes, fleece vest, AirPods in, well-groomed, maybe slightly dirty nails. Honestly, the type of person you wouldn't look twice at. He told my husband he liked his jacket. My husband thanked him. Then he complimented mine too. I awkwardly said something like, "Thanks man, you too," even though his outfit was pretty generic. He smiled and sarcastically replied, "I'm sure you do." It was subtle, but something about the tone felt weird. Still, none of it seemed too alarming. We made small talk and he asked where we were headed, and we said we were staying with family nearby. He started talking about family too, except every comment he made had this bitter, self-depreciating edge to it. At one point he said something along the lines of friends and family not mattering anyway. I tried being nice about it, just casual conversation with a stranger while waiting for a ride. But then something changed. I cannot explain this properly without sounding insane, I think, but the atmosphere shifted so suddenly that I physically felt it. I got chills all over my body. Not anxiety and not nervousness. Actual primal fear. The guy's expression changed completely. He was still talking normally, but the way he was looking at us suddenly felt deeply wrong. The only way I could describe it is that he looked at us like he wanted to hurt us. There was this intense anger behind his eyes that absolutely had not been there before. I remember noticing he had no luggage at all, just a backpack, which struck me as odd because he'd mentioned getting off a long flight. Then somewhere in the conversation he casually said, "I don't have a home." Again, none of this sounds terrifying written out, but standing there in that moment, every instinct in my body was screaming at me that something was wrong with this person. My husband usually gets absorbed in conversations and doesn't pick up on weird vibes immediately, but I knew I needed to get away from this guy without escalating anything. So instead of abruptly saying we were leaving, I quietly walked back inside the airport and down the ramp toward arrivals, leaving my husband outside talking to him. I made up an excuse that I had to go to the bathroom and he just said, "Oh, the bathroom, huh?" I know that sounds terrible, but I genuinely thought if I acted alarmed or made it obvious I was scared, something bad would happen. Once I got downstairs, I called my husband and told him as calmly as I could, "You need to come inside right now. Something is seriously wrong with that dude." While I was on the phone, I could hear the man say the following: "Oh, is that your friend? Tell them to come back out." My husband wrapped up the conversation politely, saying something like, "Nice meeting you, dude." And the guy responded in this cold, almost mocking voice, "Yeah, I'm sure you really mean that." The way he said it genuinely made my stomach drop. A minute later, my husband finally came back inside. The second I saw him walk around the corner, I felt relief wash over me. Before I could even explain myself properly, he immediately said the following: "No, I get it. That felt really scary." That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining it. We waited inside until my husband's mom arrived. The second we got in the car, she started asking how we were, excited to see us after we'd been away for a while. And honestly, I was relieved to see her too. Not just because we hadn't seen her in some time, but because it genuinely felt like she had unknowingly pulled us out of something awful. The entire time we were driving out of the airport, I had this horrible adrenaline still running through me. I immediately started trying to explain what had just happened, talking too fast and trying to describe why the interaction had scared me so bad. But the more I tried to explain it out loud, the more impossible it sounded. Nothing had technically happened. The guy never threatened us and he never followed us, never even raised his voice. And yet, I've never felt a stronger instinctual fear response in my life. I think part of what frustrated me so much was that I couldn't properly communicate what had felt so deeply wrong about him. Not to her, not fully to my husband, although he felt it too, and honestly not even to myself. As we drove out of the airport, we passed the same man sitting alone further down the terminal. He didn't look over at us, but I remember staring at him through the car window, feeling like we had narrowly escaped something I still can't explain. So to the man outside Dulles Airport that morning, I never want to see you again. Last night I was doing my own thing, probably playing Dispatch, honestly a peak game, when the power suddenly went out. This isn't unusual where we live. It happens sometimes because we are a small town in Mexico. Since there was nothing else to do, I decided to go to sleep. At the same time, my mom was upstairs on a hammock using her phone. The puppies usually follow anybody who moves around, but that night they eventually settled down. She was on a call with somebody, and at one point the person asked her if she was alone. She said yes. Later, she explained that she thought he meant just her, not including her kids like me and my sister. After the call, she went downstairs, did the dishes, and came to sleep. All of us sleep in the same room because the other rooms are currently used for dogs. Around 1 o'clock to 1:30 a.m., I woke up to knocking outside and whistling. I thought about moving, but my mom immediately whispered very seriously, "Don't move." So I stayed completely still. This part matters. My bed is one of those string beds that makes a lot of noise if you move even a little bit. There was also no power or AC and it was hot. I barely moved the entire time because I was scared of making noise. The man outside walked into our property, knocked on 2 doors, knocked on the front window, and even tried to open it. Our doors are loud and squeaky, so it was obvious he was trying to not make noise or expose himself. Eventually, he stopped and left quietly. What makes this worse is my mom's reaction after. My sister and I were scared and couldn't sleep properly. My mom, however, went back to sleep and was snoring like nothing happened. When my sister asked what was going on, my mom lied and said it was probably the dogs trying to get in, even though there was no barking and the dogs were most likely asleep upstairs. The next day, today, my mom finally told me the truth. The same man who asked her if she was alone was the one who came to the house. She said she had plans to tell him that if he does it again, she'll report him to the guards, or police, but we live in a very small town with barely any police presence and no clear addresses. Honestly, I'm just frustrated. Somebody tried to enter our home in the middle of the night, and my mom downplayed it and lied about it instead of prioritizing safety. I don't know what to do next. Should I tell my stepfather? He lives in another country and only speaks Spanish, but I feel like he should know. When I was about 13, I was waiting for the bus at the end of my driveway. I lived in the country and it was fairly light outside. I had waited at the end of the driveway hundreds of times, ever since I was a young child. Many times I even stood at the end of it by myself after my parents took off for work. That was not one of the days that I had to be home alone, but my mother did stay inside as usual. She suffered from a bit of prescription drug problem, which oftentimes incapacitated her and left her unable to get up from the sofa. It was one of those mornings. As I waited, a silver SUV started to pull up over on the side of the road, right in front of me. I stepped back a little bit, surprised and giving the vehicle some space to park beside the road. We lived in a very small rural community, so it wasn't uncommon for random neighbors I did not know to pull in and want to talk to my dad. However, this was a car I had never seen before, and the people inside were people I had never seen before as well. Nevertheless, I shrugged it off and decided to see what they wanted. I had never been taught about stranger danger or any of that. We didn't learn about those things in my community back then. They rolled down the passenger side window and revealed that they were an elderly couple. They were both dressed rather well and seemed to be friendly as the woman smiled at me and beckoned me towards her sweetly. I didn't get too close, but I did approach her. I wish I could say it was against my better judgment, but it honestly wasn't. I just didn't know any better. "Are you from here?" the woman asked. "We need some directions." "Yes, I am from here," I said. "What are you looking for?" "So, do you know where the feed store is?" the man asked before telling me he was from the neighboring town. I frowned. The feed store was a local place that farmers went to and every local knew how to get there. Even people in the neighboring town would know, so it was a bit strange for somebody to not know where it was, but I just assumed they were old and forgetful. My grandma forgot where things were fairly often, so I thought it wasn't too strange. I gave them very thorough directions and assumed they would drive away, but they didn't. "So it's that road right there?" the old woman asked, pointing to a nearby dirt road. I furrowed my brow. I had stated very specifically that the first intersection was another few miles up the road, so I corrected her. The woman gave me a blank stare with wide eyes and shook her head. The man's eyes were starting to dart from her to me, and I noticed he looked uncomfortable. There were cars driving around them, and they did not seem to like that much, but I was too young to realize what was making them nervous. I assumed they were just desperately looking for the feed store. "So it's that one?" the woman asked, pointing to a different nearby dirt road. I nearly scowled, but I had always been taught to be polite to old people, so I shook my head. Then the woman did something strange. She started to open her car door, smiling wildly at me and reaching towards me. She didn't get out entirely, but she shot a glance at a red car that was passing their car, which was still parked on the side of the main road. I quickly took a few steps back and turned to look at the front of my house, irate with my mother being too high to check on me. "Why don't you just show us where it is?" she asked, reaching closer. Suddenly, the front door of my house bursted open and there was my mom. Although she was still high and certainly not entirely aware of the situation, I truly believe she had to have some sort of sixth sense to open that door, because the lady quickly closed her door and the old man floored the accelerator. They were gone and they did not go anywhere near the feed store. My mother wandered outside in her pink fuzzy slippers, groggy and mad. She rubbed her forehead and gave me a strange look. "Who was that?" she asked. "I don't know, they wanted directions to the feed store," I told her. "They were just old people." My mother looked uncomfortable, but she accepted my answer and went back inside, undoubtedly to get high again. I got on the bus and forgot all about the weird couple for the day, and for the next week because nothing was out of the ordinary. Then the Sunday newspaper came. My mom was high as usual, flipping through it in a very casual manner. Suddenly, her face became pale. At first, I thought she was overdosing, which I had unfortunately seen before. I rushed to her to make sure she was okay, but it wasn't an OD at all. Her eyes were wide and full of horror, and all she did was point at an article. It wasn't a big article. It actually took up a part of the newspaper not much larger than a single obituary or wedding announcement. However, the content was life-changing. Please note that I have not gone searching for this old newspaper article, and even if I did, I wouldn't want to post it to give away my location here. It still makes me uncomfortable to this day. As I looked at the article, I saw 4 very small pictures. 2 were the old man and woman that I had seen a week prior, and the other 2 were a small boy and a girl about my age. I had hardly ever thought about the encounter until that moment, and what I read terrified me. The couple had been caught in the neighboring town. They had lied about their location, claiming they were from a town slightly nicer than the one the newspaper said they were found. I noticed that immediately. Then the article went on to say that they had been keeping a young boy only 6 years old in their basement. He was in diapers, being starved, and being abused in many ways. They had been selling his body to local meth users. As if that was not disturbing enough, there was also a girl. She was 14 and emaciated, but she looked like me. She had the same blonde hair and bright eyes. I imagine she probably looked much more like me once, but before she went through what she did. The people had supposedly locked her in a closet. They starved her, abused her, also with some disturbing tools of some sort. The girl lived, astoundingly, but the article did not go into detail regarding her physical and mental health. I cannot imagine what that poor girl went through, and I'm just thankful that I never joined her in that closet. I made a Reddit account just to share this story with you all, so here it goes. I must have been around 8 years old at the time this happened, and my sister was 12 or 13. We lived in a tiny little house that we called the shack that our mom moved us into after she split up with our father because it was all we could afford. My sister and I shared a tiny bedroom, but one perk about the house was the huge backyard with a large above-ground pool and deck we could always play on. We had a big privacy fence, and being the nosy little kid I was, I liked to climb on some of the wooden boards of the fence and check out the neighbors. I recognized 2 other little boys who lived in the house kitty corner to us because they went to my school. I made it a habit every day to climb up my side of the fence and hang around and talk to them. I never climbed over the fence, just climbed up a plank so I was high enough to peer over and talk. They had an uncle named Randy who was probably in his mid-20s or 30s, and he was usually in the backyard doing housework, so I got to know him as well. And both my sister and I would hang on the fence and chat with him most days. The conversations were always innocent, and he seemed like a nice guy. Now looking back, I can see some red flags about him. I remember one time he had a basketball and accidentally threw it over our fence. We offered to grab it for him, but he insisted he would get it himself and hopped over the fence with ease. We thought nothing of it at the time, but I imagine this was to test how easily or fast he could scale it. One day in passing, my sister mentioned to him that our mom works the night shift and therefore it was just the 2 of us alone at night in the house. Well, that was all he needed to hear. Shortly after that it happened. I woke up one night to the sound of my sister crying. We shared a bunk bed, me on the bottom, and when I stood up, she was out of bed leaning against the wall on the phone crying. I asked her what was wrong, but she assured me everything was fine and to go back to sleep. So I did. It wasn't until the next day that I learned what happened. Apparently in the middle of the night, while our mom was away at work, Randy jumped the fence and tried to break in. He started banging on our bedroom window, telling my sister to let him in. She refused, but he wouldn't take no for an answer, so he started walking around the entire house, banging on windows, yelling for her to let him in, and trying all the doors. That's when she got out of bed and called the police, and I woke up. Yeah, I have no idea how I managed to sleep all through that commotion, because she tells me he was banging on our window right by our bed loud, but I guess you just sleep like you're dead when you're little. Of course, by the time the cops arrived, all he had to do was jump the fence in 10 seconds, and he was back in his yard. They knocked on his door, but he denied he did it, so the police said there was nothing they could do. We were shaken by the incident, of course. My mom wasn't able to change her work schedule, so she started having us stay at her dad's at night. A few years passed without incident, and we assumed everything was fine. I had long stopped talking to the boys next door. Then it happened again, and guess who slept through the entire thing again? My sister was a couple of years older now and had a group of friends over for a sleepover one night. We had a sliding glass door to the backyard, near where they were all sitting. The door had the typical vertical blinds, except weeks earlier one of them had broken and we couldn't get it to stay back on no matter what, so there was a gap in between the blinds where the broken one was gone. Anyway, the girls were all sitting around the couch playing board games when one of my sister's friends suddenly turned rigid. She said, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy standing at your sliding glass door." They all turned around, and there was Randy again, his face pressed up to the glass where the gap in the blinds was, just watching them all. Of course, everybody freaked out, and the police were called. And just like last time, he jumped the fence, and the cops said they couldn't prove anything, even though they described what he was wearing, and he answered the door in the same outfit when the police questioned him. That was the last straw, so we moved out of that house and got a restraining order against him. He didn't show up to court that day, so the judge automatically granted us the order. Never saw him again last I checked. I looked him up online, and he's currently in prison for a bunch of random charges. So back in 2010, I lived in a real dive of a place with 4 other guys. It was a triplex the owner had converted into one house. The place was just short of being condemned, but we were all in our 20s and wanted a party house, so it totally worked for us. We threw so many parties that we didn't notice a lot of the stuff. Like when the spare bedroom window was smashed. We assumed one of our drunk friends did it by accident. Anytime food went missing, obviously one of our drunk idiot roommates just stole it, even though nobody ever fessed up to it. We also had a ridiculous problem with what we assumed were raccoons. All the damn time we would hear scratching and shuffling up on the roof. Every morning we would go out and our trash would be all over the place. Well, after about a year of random messes, missing food and alcohol, and eerie scratches, one of my roommates and I were leaving the house at the same time for work. As we step outside, there is a familiar woman in our front yard. We have seen her a few times wandering the streets in the neighborhood, but never really paid her any attention. She's wearing one of my t-shirts and going through our trash can, tossing things on the ground she isn't interested in. My roommate and I both freeze as we see the woman doing this, and she is very slowly looking up at us. Her eyes are totally glassed over, and she stares at us with confusion all over her face. My eyes go wide as I recognize my t-shirt, and I go to open my mouth when she says something that, to this day, has made me shudder. "Why are you living in my house?" And that was all I could handle. I assure you, I am not somebody that is ever short on words, but this rendered me entirely speechless. My roommate and I stared at each other, eyes wide, got in our cars and drove the heck away from our own home, just to get away from the situation. That night, we had all of the boys together and we told them what happened, and we made the decision to finally investigate the roof. Turns out that we had a flat roof. It's not generally the kind of thing you think about. Most roofs are slanted or have angles, but not ours. It was just a flat roof, like a 2-story building cut in half. You just couldn't see the top because it had an awning that blocked the flat roof from the view around it. So for the first time we climbed up there, and discovered somebody had been living on our roof. Many of our missing things were strewn all over. There was a makeshift bed, spare clothing, food, wrappers, water, and even books all just sitting there. We moved out shortly after that, but I've never forgotten the look of the lady staring at me and asking what I was doing living in her house. When I was a young child, I lived in a picture-perfect small town in the middle of nowhere. It was a tiny, isolated community off of a highway with quite literally about 200 inhabitants. Everybody knew each other. Doors were never locked. Kids ran free outside, and people talked to one another. A very trusting community. My family moved into this town when I was 3, so for years we were outsiders. Everybody was very friendly, but my family did not fit in. We were English, from a big city, and the town we moved into was very French. This limited our ability to get to know our neighbors initially because we all only spoke the most basic French. During the summers when I wasn't in school, my younger brother and I would just run loose in the town. We would get on our bikes and spend all day racing around town, exploring every nook and cranny. Eventually, the two of us settled into a routine. We would spend the first half of the day on the other side of town exploring, which was in actuality like 2 blocks from home still. This town is small. By the creek, go back to our house for lunch, and then spend the afternoon until dinner time biking on our side of town. There was this one house in particular that we loved to bike in front of. It was owned by a little French man named Pierre, who would often be sitting in the front yard or tending his garden. He had fresh, nice asphalt in his driveway, which was unheard of in this part of the world. Everybody else either had a gravel driveway or broken old asphalt. Even the roads and sidewalks were in shit condition compared to this man's driveway. He would always smile at us when we would bike at the end of his driveway, and one day he came down and told us in broken English that we didn't need to stay at the bottom and were welcome to go as far up his driveway as we wanted. My brother and I were so happy. We spent the day racing up and down his driveway and went home for dinner. Pierre's driveway became a part of our summer afternoon routine after that. We would race up and down his driveway for hours. Pierre seemed to love having us around and would sit in his chair and watch us play. He eventually started carrying candy for us and would give us each a piece when we arrived at his house. My brother and I were too young to pick up on the subtle changes in Pierre over the summer, but looking back, he would always try and convince us to go inside. "Just come into my garage to play," he would say from his chair with a huge smile. "I have even more candy inside." I would always decline for the both of us. I was the older kid, and I just had a feeling that my parents would be mad at me if we did. They didn't know that we had made friends with Pierre, and I didn't want them to find out and stop us from using his driveway. Summer came and went, and nothing of note happened that first summer. The next year, we once again got out of school, and we were released to the town by our parents each day to play. We didn't bike as much as we did the summer before, but would still go to Pierre's house a few times a week to bike up and down his driveway. This summer, we started to make friends with the other kids in the town, having finally learned enough French to play with them. Pierre faded from our minds, as did his candy and perfect biking driveway. Towards the end of the summer year, Pierre started coming over to our house. Our dad had planted a garden and wanted to get it set up to grow produce for the next year. Pierre had found out about this and had begun helping my dad with the yard work for a few hours each evening. He would always have some candy for me and a candy for my brother. School started again. One day after the bus dropped us off at our home, Pierre stepped out from the side of our house. We both went up to him, but he waved me away and gave only my brother candy. After my brother hugged him, he left, and I thought nothing of it. In my mind, he didn't give me candy because I was old now, only 8, and he only gave candy to babies like my brother, who was 5, nearly 6. This became its own weird little routine. Pierre would meet us immediately after we got off the bus, give my brother a candy in exchange for a hug, and then leave. One day my bus driver idled in front of my house after dropping us off. Pierre stuck to his routine and came around the side, arms opening for a hug. My brother obliged, got his candy, and Pierre shuffled away. The doors to our bus flew open and the bus driver, Lily, a lovely lady, came running. She was frantic, asking me if we had ever met that man before. I was so very confused and tried to explain that he was a family friend and we had known him since we moved into town. She asked me for my phone number and said she wanted to call my mom about him. I couldn't understand why, assuming I was in trouble, and started crying. She calmed me down, promising me that we weren't in any sort of trouble, and just keep saying in her somewhat broken English that she needed to talk to my mother about Pierre. I gave her the number and forgot about this strange encounter until that evening at dinner. Lily called at about 7 p.m. My mom picked up the phone and went white as a sheet listening to Lily. Once she got off the phone, she explained to me that Pierre wasn't allowed to play with us anymore and to stay far away from him. She would never explain why, just that we weren't allowed. A few years later, she told me one night, Pierre was a sexual predator who had long ago done something horrible. Everybody in the town knew about it and avoided him and warned their children about it. Creepier still, the bus driver had called my mom because of the way Pierre was hugging my brother. The bus driver knew this wasn't a friendly hug and that we were too young to realize what was happening. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we had gone in his house. For the rest of the years we lived in that town, we made a point to avoid Pierre.